Good afternoon, welcome. I am Digby Ricci, and today we continue our exploration of Shakespeare's early love tragedy, Romeo and Juliet. This is the second lecture on the language and imagery of love in Romeo and Juliet. In the first lecture, I looked at the environment of the play, the way in which the irrational Montague-Capulet feud inverts all order, and the difficulty of true love developing in such a brutal and tragic world. I also looked at the fact that Shakespeare starts his definition of love by looking at perversions of love. And thus we have the brutal sexual quibbling of the Capulet retainers. We have the commitment to aggression of Tybalt. And we also have Romeo's very egotistical, very self-centered, debased version of Petrarchan love, dedicated to the unattainable Rosaline. At the end of my previous lecture, I glanced at the very popular figure of Mercutio, very popular with both readers and viewers of Romeo and Juliet, and I presented what some of you may have felt was rather too critical a view of Mercutio. However, I do stick to my guns, for I firmly believe that for all his inventiveness, his unfailingly entertaining bawdy wit, Mercutio is incapable of understanding genuine love, and therefore he belongs securely to the world of the feud, rather than to the world of the transformed Romeo and Juliet. Remember Romeo's extraordinary summation of Mercutio's character. He jests at scars that never felt a wound. In Lecture 1, I referred to the great Shakespearean scholar Harold C. Goddard and his view of Mercutio. I would like to quote more substantially from Mr. Goddard's essay on Romeo and Juliet. And this passage on Mercutio, I think, is very interesting indeed. Goddard writes of the Queen Mab's speech, "Undoubtedly the lines reveal an unsuspected side of Mercutio. The prankish delicacy of some of them stands out in pleasing contrast with his grosser aspects. The psychology of this is sound. The finer side of a sensualist," and a sensualist means a person who is dedicated to the desires of the flesh and particularly to sexuality. The finer side of a sensualist is suppressed and is bound to come out, if at all, incidentally, in just such a digression as the Queen Mab speech seems to be. The lines on Queen Mab are indeed delightful, but imagination in any proper sense they are not. They are sheer fancy. Mercutio, with his aldermen and his gnats, his coachmakers and sweetmeats and parsons and drums and ambuscados, may tell us a little about the littlest of dreams. And I think Goddard's point about the fundamental littleness of Mercutio is a very important point indeed. Because true imagination, genuine emotion, are found, obviously, in the exchanges of Romeo and Juliet. I've already commented in some detail on Romeo's initial response to Juliet, in which suddenly the literary platitudes that clung to his image of Rosaline are purged completely, and he speaks with an intensity and a beauty that we have not heard him use before. He is responding here to real love, and the imagery that he uses communicates the genuineness of the emotion. The ideal love which Romeo and Juliet achieve is manifest in the sonnet in which they exchange vows, in a sense. They commit themselves to each other, and they speak in a perfect love sonnet. It expresses passion, certainly, but it expresses passion in the language of religious devotion. Romeo describes his lips as two blushing pilgrims, And it's a lovely image, that. Religious travellers, pilgrims, but still ruddy with life and vibrancy, blushing pilgrims. He tries to persuade Juliet to grant him a kiss. He does so teasingly. She resists, but finally does grant him the kiss. And the religious imagery continues. Juliet is described as a holy shrine, and she says playfully that if she is a saint, the icon of a saint, she cannot move, but she can grant prayers. She can grant rewards to prayers. And the reward, of course, is the kiss that she gives to Romeo. So there is youthful passion here, certainly, but one notices immediately that there is an intense feeling of reverence as well. In this wonderful love sonnet, Shakespeare suggests that Romeo and Juliet have already achieved a love that is both erotic and reverent. And that's very important indeed. The spiritual and the fleshly, the erotic and the reverential unite in their love. And Shakespeare uses his diction, his imagery, to communicate this extraordinary union. For although Romeo and Juliet is very critical of the kind of debased Petrarchanism of Romeo's infatuation with Rosaline, the Petrarchanism that seems to delight in a masochistic wallowing in misery and to gain pleasure from the unattainable nature of the beloved, the play never suggests that true love should not contain an element of idealization. Petrarch, who lived from 1304 to 1374, was the father of Italian humanism, and in his love sonnets he strives to achieve a union, a love which will be both satisfying to human beings and acceptable to God. In short, true Petrarchanism strives to elevate the beauties of the flesh while at the same time glorifying the mind and the soul. And this is the kind of love that Shakespeare celebrates in Romeo and Juliet, and which Romeo and Juliet actually achieve, even if it is for such a tragically brief period. In the legendary balcony scene of Act 2, Scene 2, Romeo greets Juliet's appearance as if it were the rising of the sun. His adoration of the coldly chaste Rosaline was linked to the pale and sickly moon, but now that has been obliterated, and Juliet has brought a new day into his life. Again, language is used that suggests both passion and spirituality. In one of my favourite lines in the text, Romeo cries out, "Oh, speak again, bright angel." And the adjective combined with that noun is very effective indeed. Juliet is an ethereal being to him, but she is also blazing with light. She is a bright angel to him. Juliet describes Romeo most memorably as a tassel gentle. And the tassel gentle is a particular kind of falcon, a peregrine falcon, the most beautiful of these raptors, and one that was reserved in falconry for princes. Romeo responds to Juliet's use of the falcon image by calling her his Nias, that's spelled N-Y-A-S. And a Nias is a nestling falcon, one that has not yet left the nest. So this imagery, the bird imagery, is particularly effective, I think, because Juliet is celebrating Romeo's beauty, his heroism, his daring in meeting with her at all. And Romeo at this point is responding protectively to Juliet's youth and innocence. However, some lines later, Juliet describes Romeo as being her pet. She wishes he were a wanton's bird that she could keep as close to as possible and that she could playfully manipulate. Such variations in the imagery of love do not indicate inconsistencies in the lover's emotions, but rather a complete liberation from constraining stereotypes. Romeo can be both princely hero and indulged, cosseted darling in this love relationship. Juliet can be, and is, both naive and innocent, and yet capable of mature wisdom. An example of her wisdom is indicated in the balcony scene when she comments that although she has great joy in their contact, she has no real joy in the form this contact takes tonight. She says, "It is too rash, too unadvised, too sudden, too much like the lightning that doth cease to be, ere one can say it lightens." Juliet is aware that their love has developed with extraordinary intensity at extraordinary speed. It has to, within the environment of the feud. But this speed is dangerous, and she is already aware of that danger. Both lovers delight in the infinite variety of emotions that they need not be afraid of revealing. Their language asserts a multifaceted definition of love that frees them completely from limiting simplifications. The advent of Juliet in Romeo's life has liberated him from the imprisonment of romantic stereotypes. And this is a very important point to remember. In Lecture 1, I referred to a legendary production of Romeo and Juliet on stage, the 1935 production directed by Sir John Gielgud, which was particularly famous for its use of symbolic costume. And apparently in this production, Gielgud clothed Juliet at one stage in a sage green dress with flowers embroidered upon it, flowers that were modelled on the flowers in Botticelli's great painting about the coming of spring, the Primavera. And this, I think, is a lovely detail, a wonderful idea for a costume for Juliet, for it suggests that she brings fertility and new life. And that is exactly what she does bring to Romeo. Romeo and Juliet struggle, therefore, to preserve a complex definition of love in the face of the murderous simplifications of the feud, and also, do not forget, the tyrannical simplifications of the matchmaking Capulet parents. Succumbing to simplification, Shakespeare suggests, renders one vulnerable to the vicissitudes of existence in what can only be called Feud Torn Verona. Shakespeare's play suggests that whatever arbitrary disasters fortune may inflict upon humanity, the best protection against the uncertainty of fortune is always to be aware of, always to confront the complexities of humanity and of God's creation. This is what Friar Lawrence insists upon in one of the most important speeches in Romeo and Juliet, that you will find in Act 2, Scene 3. The friar, who is an accomplished herbalist, insists that complexities are appropriate components of the great unity of God's macrocosm. The friar perceives the earth as a place of both poison and medicine, in which the same sources can be responsible for healing and for destruction. As he puts it, within the infant rind of this weak flower, poison hath residence and medicine power. For this, being smelt, with that part cheers each part. Being tasted, stays. Stays means stops there. All senses with the heart. And you'll find this in Act 2, Scene 3, lines 19 to 22. The friar's insistence is that the paramountcy of man's reasoning power is our only true protection in this immensely complex world. For only a controlled, probing mind can explore the extraordinary diversity of God's creations. Blind passion results in catastrophe. because it embraces simplistic solutions and follows simplified courses of action. When the friar warns Romeo, they stumble that run fast. He is making a point that is both physical and profoundly emotional. The antithesis of Friar Lawrence is the apothecary, who is described in Act 5, Scene 1. The apothecary's shop is a pitiful symbol of decay and death. Monstrous dead creatures, an alligator stuffed, ill-shaped fishes, musty seeds, old scents, unused remnants of threads, empty containers, all emblematize the futility and pathos of a wrongly dedicated existence. As opposed to the friar, who understands the complexity of God's creations, looks for healing in the midst of a world in which there's also poison, the apothecary is an indigent person who is dedicated to death, dedicated to a simplified world for all its dramatic squalor. When Romeo tempestuously seeks the apothecary's aid, he chooses a restricted, impoverished, in every sense, vision of the world. And in so doing, he dedicates himself to tragedy, for he denies the vast potential of an earth that, as the friar understands, produces both baleful weeds and precious juiced flowers. Romeo has, however, betrayed the comprehensive love vision of his relationship with Juliet even before his exile and his meeting with the apothecary. In Act 3, Scene 1, he rejects what he temporarily perceives as the weakening, feminizing influence of his relationship with Juliet, and tragically, he accepts the simplistic definitions provided by the macho combatants of the feud. In Act 3, Scene 1, lines 115 to 170, he exclaims, "O sweet Juliet, thy beauty hath made me effeminate, and in my temper softened valor's steel." Romeo chooses the familiar world of simplified hatred over the complex world that love demands, a world of peace and compassion. When he decides to fight Tybalt, Romeo wrongly defines unreasoning violence as valor's steel, as true courage. Choosing peace over violence would be genuine courage at this point. And when he makes this incorrect choice, he makes himself fortune's fool, the puppet of fortune. In Romeo and Juliet, easy solutions are no solutions at all. And it is important to explore Shakespeare's concept of fortune and how it is expressed in his language and imagery. Yes, the lovers are star-crossed. They are doomed. But that does not mean that they lack freedom of choice. Shakespeare's concept of fortune in this play, and in many others, is akin to that of the philosopher Machiavelli in his key text, The Prince. Discussing how fortune can be opposed, Machiavelli compares fortune to one of those violent rivers which, when they are enraged, flood the plains. Mankind can only flee. There is no possibility of resistance. However, in order to safeguard oneself against such arbitrary destruction, human beings can construct what Machiavelli calls embankments and dikes. And in order to do so, we must use our reasoning powers. By abandoning reason and choosing oversimplified passionate hatred, Romeo destroys his own and all humanity's strongest embankment. Fortune's violent river then engulfs him, and he truly becomes Fortune's fool, the puppet or plaything of Fortune. And this, I think, is an appropriate point at which to conclude our second discussion of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet.